Have you ever wanted to buy, I don't know, let's say, half of Mexico? Yeah, probably not. Well, here's someone who has. This guy. Please welcome James K. Polk, an American politician and lawyer from the 19th century. A man with class, convictions, and who might just happen to one day become President of the United States. Oops, spoiler. Now keep this guy in mind for a bit while we first head back to the early 19th century. In the early 1820s, North America roughly looked something like this. We got the Russians in Alaska, the British in Canada, the Americans in the United States, and the Spanish in Mexico. And here's the thing. During that period, America kept expanding in every direction, believing in a little something called manifest destiny. Here's the definition, according to Wikipedia. Manifest destiny was a cultural belief in the 19th century United States that American settlers were destined to expand across North America. There were three basic tenets to the concept: the special virtues of the American people, the mission of the United States to redeem and remake the West in the image of the agrarian East, and an irresistible destiny to accomplish this essential duty. Wow, what the hell does that mean? In simpler terms, most Americans thought that they had a responsibility to spread civilization, religion, and democracy all across North America. And so, after going from this to this in the span of less than 50 years, by the 1820s, America had its eyes on this region. And as it turns out, it would soon have a shot at taking it. In 1821, Mexico got its independence from Spain, and that led to a few problems. The newly independent country was incredibly weak, crippled by internal divisions and corruption. But the bigger problem was in the north, where native tribes started raiding the region and stealing everyone's stuff. Several native tribes, like the Comanches, took advantage of the situation and would oftentimes attack the region and steal people's cows, horses, and anything they could get their hands on, really. So, imagine this. Here's Diego. Diego owns a farm in northern Mexico. Diego's having a good day when, eventually, he comes home and sees that, wait for it, all his chickens are gone. Well, guess what now? Diego's not having a good day anymore. Now, that whole thing wasn't helped by the fact that the region was sparsely settled. Less than 10,000 people lived in that whole area in the 1820s. So, the Mexican government had an idea. Bring more people. In an attempt to curb the native raids, the Mexican government started encouraging the settlement of American citizens into the region, hoping that with more people living there and able to defend the place, the natives would be, well, less inclined to attack. And to some extent, the whole plan did work. Very quickly, thousands of Americans started flocking to Texas with the promise of fertile lands and a shot at starting a new life. But wait a minute, don't you see a problem? No? Well, look again. Do you still not see it? Okay, I'm gonna help you. Look at the numbers. The policy had worked a little too well, and by 1836, close to 40,000 Americans had moved into the region. And even more concerning, some of these same Americans started seriously thinking about joining back America. And, wait for it, taking their new state with them. So, with Texas threatening to secede from the country, the Mexican government started tightening its grip on the region. Immigration from the US was shut down, tariffs were put on American goods, and slavery was banned in the area. Nationally, the government also became increasingly centralized and started taking power away from the states. Huh, I called your bluff. What are you gonna do now? I guess I'm gonna leave. And that's exactly what happened. In 1835, the Texans revolted against the Mexican government. The Texans fought fiercely and eventually gained their independence in 1836. Now, almost immediately, the Texans asked to join the United States. But, problem. At the time, the Americans were in the midst of a national discussion to figure out whether slavery was a good thing or a bad thing. In Texas, well, Texas was a slave state. Was that a good thing? Was it not? Well, the Americans didn't really know. And so, until the Americans found the answer, Texas waited. And waited. And waited. Almost 10 years went by, and the Americans still hadn't figured out the answer. Well, it feels like they could really use some help right now. Preferably from a man with class. With convictions. With, you see where this is going. James K. Polk. Polk became the 11th President of the United States in 1845 and promised a couple of things on his campaign trail. First, he would admit Texas into the Union. Second, he would settle the dispute between the US and the UK regarding Oregon. And third, he would not seek a second term in office, as he only needed one to do everything he wanted to do. As I've said, he's a man with convictions. And not only did James K. Polk make cold promises, he delivered on them. In 1845, Texas was finally admitted into the Union as the 28th American state. And in 1846, the Oregon Treaty settled the dispute between Britain and America regarding Oregon. Yes, convictions. But the annexation of Texas quickly led to a new dispute, this time between the United States and Mexico. The Americans claimed that the border between the two countries was at the Rio Grande, the border agreed upon at the time of Texas' independence, while the Mexicans argued the border was at the Nueces River, the border of the original state of Texas when it was still part of Mexico. So where was the border? Well, no one knew. Or maybe someone did. And that's right, a border dispute with Mexico? What are you talking about? More like an acquisition opportunity. And James K. Polk decided to make an offer to Mexico. $30 million in exchange for Mexico's recognition of the Rio Grande border, plus California and New Mexico. What do you think? Is that a good deal? Well, let's see the Mexicans' reaction to that offer. That's right, there was no reaction. Knowing fully well in advance the BS the Americans would try to sell them, the Mexicans refused to even receive the US envoy who was sent there to negotiate. So, what do? Do we give up? Convictions. And Polk decided that, well, if the Mexicans refused to peacefully agree to his terms, he would impose the Rio Grande as the border, by force. And the Americans moved their troops in the contested region, leaving the Mexicans in a pretty tough spot. They now had two choices. Either let the Americans take over the region and probably say goodbye to their claim over it, or they could attack and retake the area, but that could risk a war with America. Rough choice. And given that we're discussing the Mexican-American War, you might have figured out what happens next. In 1846, the Mexicans crossed the Rio Grande and killed a bunch of American soldiers stationed there. Seeing this as an act of aggression, Congress declared war on Mexico on the 13th of May, 1846. With the goal of winning the war as quickly as possible, the American government dispatched two armies to fight Mexico. The first one moved west with the goal of conquering New Mexico and California. It was met with almost no resistance, and the Americans were able to take over these territories pretty quickly. The other one moved south and clashed with the bulk of the Mexican army. The two armies fought each other several times, with the Mexicans fighting fiercely, bogging down the Americans and inflicting heavy casualties among US troops. And I guess who wasn't happy about that? That's right, and Polk dispatched a third army, by sea this time, to take Mexico City and force the Mexicans to surrender. Fearing the fall of their capital, the Mexicans decided to strike hard and fast, and in 1847 they launched a big offensive. At the Battle of Buena Vista, 15,000 Mexican soldiers faced 5,000 Americans. Who won the battle? Well, we don't really know, but the Mexicans were the ones who ended up retreating. In the south, the Americans finally took Mexico City in September 1847. Now, seeing that their capital had been taken and their forces defeated, the Mexican government decided to sue for peace. The war was over. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed on the 2nd of February 1848. Mexico was to recognize the Rio Grande as the border between the two countries and give away a huge chunk of its territory to the United States. In exchange, Mexico was given $15 million as compensation, and the United States agreed to cancel some of Mexico's debts. With the addition of all these new territories into the Union, the question of slavery in America would soon become explosive, paving the way for the American Civil War a couple of years later. But that's a different story. With this war, America greatly expanded its territory and became a pretty massive country. I mean, just look at these smooth edges. This war saw modern-day California, Nevada, and Utah, as well as part of modern-day Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming join the United States. Now, as promised, after only one term in office, James K. Polk returned home with the satisfaction that he accomplished everything he said he would, and more. In the end, he did buy off of Mexico, and in the process, did give a totally new meaning to the word conviction.